You know, every morning in Africa, a gazelle wakes up knowing it must outrun the fastest lion or it'll die. Each day a lion wakes up knowing it must outrun the slowest gazelle or it'll starve to death. You know, it really doesn't matter whether you're a lion or a gazelle. When the sun comes up, you had better be running. And you know, the words that I just recited are on a plaque. And that plaque is in the hallway of the executive area at Wal-Mart's headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas. And you know, when Sam Walton used to walk out of his office each and every day, that plaque was right in front of him as he'd go out to do the business of retailing. So what you think about, you know, when you're out there trying to compete is that Wal-Mart is very aggressive. I'll tell you a story that is kind of the Canadian version of lions and gazelles. I was up at Whistler in British Columbia about 2 weeks ago, and I spoke at the International Council of Shopping Centers meeting. And this guy runs up to me, he says, I got to tell you this competitive story, and maybe you can use it in one of your speeches. So he says, he tells me the story about the two campers in British Columbia. And these two campers are up on the mountain in British Columbia camping overnight. And in the middle of the night, this grizzly bear comes into the camp and is madder than a hornet. So they get up and they get out of their sleeping bags, and the one camper peers out through the tent. And he turns around, and the other camper is strapping on his tennis shoes. And he says, what are you doing? You can't possibly outrun a grizzly bear. He said, I know I can't outrun a grizzly bear, but I don't have to. I just have to outrun you. And you know, when you think about the competitive world that we live in, and you think about the nature of competition in pharmacy in particular, the key to being successful is like that second camper. You have to be willing to adapt and change in order to be successful. And I know that when I wrote my first book called What I Learned from Sam Walton, How to Compete and Thrive in a Wal-Mart World, I never intended to write a book to begin with. That was not my goal, to be an embedded reporter at Wal-Mart in Bentonville and to craft a book as a result of the experience. In fact, I didn't write a book till many years later after I found the teachings were so important. And what was interesting was this. When I would go out to do interviews for my book, I would talk to pharmacists, and I talked to convenience store operators, and I talked to grocers, and I asked them, what does it take to compete and thrive in a Wal-Mart world? And I learned many, many valuable lessons that they told me that I put into my book. But what I also found out was that many of Wal-Mart's competitors have gone out of business without a fight. Just a simple announcement that a supercenter was going to be built in their locale, they shuttered their businesses up and went out of business, which is sort of amazing to me. They did it without a fight. And not only is it possible to compete, survive, and thrive in a Wal-Mart world, there's examples of pharmacies that have done it in virtually every town where Wal-Mart has opened a supercenter. And I want to share some inspirational verses as I get started this morning. If you're thinking that the idea of having more of these big box retailers coming into your communities is going to be a really difficult thing and tough competition, I hope you take some inspiration from these words. And it goes like this. If you think you're beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win but you think you can't, it's almost a cinch you won't. If you think you'll lose, you've lost. For out in the world we find, success begins with a person's will. It's all in a state of mind. If you think you're outclassed, you are. You've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win the prize. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger woman or man. But sooner or later, he or she who wins is the one who thinks they can. And as a starting point for competition in this brutally competitive pharmacy world that we live in, it begins with the belief in the beginning that you can be successful. Because the reality is, if you think you can compete, you probably can. And if you think you can't compete, you probably can't. In either case, the way that you think at the beginning will determine the outcome and whether you'll be successful or not. And that's one of the things I talk to audiences about around the world. In Istanbul, or in Caracas, Venezuela in 2 weeks from now when I go down to Venezuela, or over in Germany, or in Spain. I talk about how to compete and thrive in a Walmart world. This morning I'm going to talk about what I call the drugstore and more. And I thought this was an interesting quote to begin the session today because it helps you to understand Walmart's strategy. And the strategy that Walmart has is their priority is North America first, South America, Asia, and then Europe. And if you think in terms of what does that actually mean when you translate the North American strategy, well, you know the second largest market for Walmart in the world after the U.S., you know what it is, anybody? The market is Mexico. And in Mexico, Walmart has 900 stores in a whole variety of formats in Mexico. And they continue to have opportunities for growth in Mexico, and they continue to have opportunities for growth in the U.S. But you know, when you look at North America, do you know where the real opportunities for growth are? Some really great opportunities for growth are northward in Canada. And I'll show you a couple of interesting statistics to start out our day. Things you just need to know about Walmart, and then I'll talk about Canada in particular. In 2007, Walmart will open more than one store every day of the year somewhere on the planet Earth. They have 1.8 million employees. They have 6,600 stores around the world in 14 countries and 120 massive distribution centers. Of the 6,600 stores, only 20% of sales for Walmart come from international, 80% come from the U.S. And if you think in terms of the fact they're only in 14 countries, the writing's on the wall that their expansion is going to be international. 138 million customers cross their thresholds every week. Their annual sales are in excess of $312 billion, probably $316 billion is a more accurate number. They're the third largest pharmacy chain in the U.S. with $32 billion of sales when you blend pharmacy with OTC with HBC, or HBA as you call it. Interestingly enough, pharmacy only represents the 5% of the Walmart business, the pharmacy sales themselves, which are around $12 billion if you lump in Sam's Club. And you think about that, it's a small part of the business, the overall business of the company, but those are big numbers, $12 billion. So I tell you these statistics because that makes the presentation that I'm making today all the more meaningful for you to understand the potential for Canada with the further expansion of Walmart. When Walmart opened its supercenters for the first time in 1988, they had a very little market share in groceries. It took them about 12 years to become number one, and they now garner 20% of the grocery sales in the U.S. This past holiday season in toys, they took 45% of the U.S. toy market. And what they've done along the way is they've had made it difficult for groceries to compete in the U.S. 26 regional chains went out of business. Convenience stores, when they introduced gasoline, and all the big boxes introduced gasoline, a full 25% of convenience stores in the U.S. went out of business, and they anticipate another 25% will go out of business over the next 10 years because they rely too much on gasoline for profitability. And on and on and on. They're interested in banking. They have taken a major step into getting into banking in the U.S., and they currently have 1,000 lease locations where they have banks in the U.S. And now pharmacies. And this is not a casual interest they're taking in pharmacies, as you'll see in my presentation. I built this presentation today for you. I took a lot of time to do a lot of research on pharmacies in particular. I speak to audiences all the time about general Walmart competition, but I took it upon myself to really focus what I'm going to talk to you about today, so you're the first audience that's ever seen a lot of this material. And what I do is I build the presentation around an acronym called POCKETS. And whether you are a manufacturer, a supplier, a retailer, in any industry, you have to find a niche within which to operate, which I characterize as a business pocket. And I built my book around this acronym POCKETS, which stands for the 7 key strategies of Walmart: price, operations, culture, key item promotion, and product, expenses, talent, and service. And within those 7 areas of the POCKET acronym represent the 7 key strategies of Wal-Mart. And most of the time what I do is I go through a general presentation where I very specifically talk to audiences about how to compete and thrive in a Wal-Mart world, and I really drill down into their strategy. I also talk to companies that supply Wal-Mart. I actually have a link on my website called Vendorville. Has anybody ever heard the term Vendorville? Vendorville is an actual place, and it's in northwest Arkansas, and what's happened over the years is over 1,000 of the Wal-Mart suppliers have opened offices in northwest Arkansas in the middle of the Ozark Mountains. And what they've done is a company like Procter & Gamble has more than 200 employees fully dedicated to Walmart and Sam's Club operations based in Benton County near the Walmart headquarters. And it looks like a junior St. Louis when you go there. There's all these cranes and they're building everywhere, and Sam Walton would be shocked and awed by the amount of growth that's come to the area. But that's called Vendorville, and that's how important it is for those customers, because almost everybody that supplies Walmart, Walmart is their biggest customer. Any of you suppliers ready to move to Bentonville? Trust me, they have some difficulty attracting people down into the Ozark Mountains, and I, for one, I enjoyed my experience down there, and I lived in Bentonville, Arkansas.